Thank you. Okay. How can I move further? Sorry. Sorry. When the Italian merchant and historian Ludovico Guicciardini visited the city of Mechelen in the 1560s, he paid close attention to the remarkable great beguinage outside the city walls. He described it as follows. Although not all details were perfectly accurate, after all, a court beguinage is not a cloister, he captured its essential features. It was a lay community where women lived together in religious devotion and in dignity, without taking lifelong monastic vows. Beguines were largely self-sufficient. They could manage their property and engage in trade. Crucially, they could leave the community at any time, for instance, to marry, preserving a degree of personal autonomy that distinguished them from other forms of religious life. From its origin in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, beguine life became widely popular. While the movement spread across Western Europe, it thrived most in the Low Countries, where the high level of urbanization supported walled court beguinages. Communities of more than 100 women were not exceptional at all. The Great Beguinage of Mechelen was likely one of the largest in its kind. By the late 16th century, between 1,500 and 1,900 beguines lived there, about 8 to 10% of the city's total population. In this community, the women enjoyed a remarkable degree of collective autonomy. Yet, this autonomy came at a price. Their independence aroused suspicion and repeatedly placed their way of life under pressure. Throughout history, the tensions surrounding female independence and religious ambiguity therefore form an essential point of departure for this narrative. From October 2027 to April 2028, Museum Hof van Busleyden will pay tribute to the rich history of the court beguinages in the Low Countries. The exhibition will explore their origins, flourishing, and wider societal significance, with Mechelen as its case study. However, little remains today of this once vast community in Mechelen. The great beguinage outside the city walls was entirely destroyed during the wars of religion at the end of the 16th century, and the site is now largely covered by modern urban development. And so, I have been told, Belgium's largest McDonald's. But for more than 8 centuries, beguine communities demonstrated a remarkable resilience, adapting again and again to political changes, religious conflicts, and evolving social structures, often and also often not with great success. In Mechelen, this resilience is especially striking. After the destruction of the Great Beguinage, the community re-established itself within the city walls in the early 17th century, rising, as it were, like a phoenix from the ashes. The spiritual and symbolic heart of the renewed community became the Baroque church, completed in 1647. Its interior was later enriched with artworks by numerous artists like Theodor Boeiermans, Lucas Verderbe, Jan Cossiers, Theodor van Loon, Jan Erasmus Quilinus, and many more. Contemporary accounts rightfully called it the art cabinet from Mechelen for its exceptional Baroque imagery. The church today still preserves a large ensemble of artworks, primarily dating from the second half of the 17th century. The iconographic program within the church was carefully conceived. It served both to reinforce the devotional practices of the beguines and to highlight the saints with whom the community shared a particular affinity. As we will see, deliberate decisions were taken to form the collective identity of the beguines. Most of these objects entered the church through donations or commissions, almost exclusively by the beguines themselves. These include, for example, liturgical textiles, silverware, stained glass, sculptures, and paintings. Throughout history, we encounter countless examples of beguines acting as patrons of donors of art. Today we will only focus on some of the cases from the Mechelen context. For instance, the first telling example is the case of Johanna de Hond, a beguine from Mechelen who had a special devotion for Saint Begga. She traveled to Andenne to obtain relics from the saint, which she then brought back to Mechelen. There, she donated 5 paintings to the Mechelen Beguinage Church, illustrating the saint's life. These works are attributed to the local painter Jan Verhoeven, and today only Saint Begga as a patron saint remains in Mechelen. This iconographic emphasis was far from incidental. In the early 17th century, a lively debate emerged about the origins of the Beguine movement and the identity of its founder and patron saint. The discussion was finally resolved in favor of Begga of Andenne, a 7th century noblewoman and saint. Although there's no historical evidence whatsoever to support her role as a founder, she came to be recognized as such, though never officially by the church. Promoting her cult was more than a matter of devotion. By connecting themselves to an old and noble saintly lineage, the Beguines created a sense of shared identity and affirmed their place as a respected religious community. Another example of individual patronage can be found on High Altar. The painting by Theodor Boeiermans depicts the mystical marriage of Saint Catherine of Alexandria. This scene held particular significance for the Beguines, who saw themselves as brides of Christ and deliberately drew inspiration from the saint's life. All the other saints shown in the foreground can be directly connected to artworks and relics in the church. Of particular interest is Saint Begga, depicted at the front right, as a noblewoman, not a beguine. Scholars suggest this may be linked to the fact that the altarpiece was commissioned by the wealthy beguine and noblewoman Sofia de Salazar. Regardless of that reason, her coat of arms is clearly visible at the base of the steps, emphasizing her role as a donor. Our final example brings us to a member from a distinguished artistic family, Clara Eugenia Bruegel. Born in Antwerp in 1623, the youngest daughter of Jan Bruegel the Elder, she settled by 1648 in the court beguinage of Mechelen. As a child of a prominent artistic dynasty, she possessed substantial financial means and benefited from access to influential networks within the contemporary art world. Recent archaehistorical research, particularly by Dr. Sarah Moran, has brought this long overlooked figure back into focus. On behalf of Museum Hof van Busleyden, Dr. Moran conducted archival research into Clara Eugenia's life in the autumn of 2025. Her findings have allowed us to reconstruct several key moments in the biography of Clara Eugenia. For instance, in 1659, Clara Eugenia founded the Confraternity of Saint Ursula. It soon became one of the most prominent and devotional communities within the church. The confraternity was made up almost entirely out of women, and at its height had over 1,000 members. The cult of Saint Ursula was actively promoted in the Mechelen Beguinage, where the left side altar was dedicated to her. The community also held relics of 3 of her 11,000 companions. As Dr. Moran has temptedly noted, it is significant that the altarpiece for this altar was painted by Jan Cossiers, then Dean of the Antwerp Cult and of St. Luke, and a close associate to Clara Eugenia's brother, Jan Bruegel the Younger. It is highly likely that she continued to draw upon her artistic network throughout her life, especially after her election as Hofmeesteres, or headmistress, in 1685. The scale of her victory, 184 votes against just 53 for the next candidate, attests to the confidence placed in her leadership and to her standing within the community. Finally, we turn to a portrait traditionally identified as hers. In a manner highly unusual for depictions of mistresses, Clara Eugenia is shown seated within a landscape of ruins. In the background, one recognizes the tower of St. Rommel's Cathedral and the facade of the new Beguine Church in Mechelen. The place where she is seated appears to evoke the remains of the former Great Beguinage Church, outside the city walls. Through this carefully designed imagery, she recalls the community's past destruction and its later renewal. Her example shows how determination and resilience can turn loss into a thriving presence. This enduring transhistorical aspect is exactly what we want to highlight. These materials help us draw clearer connections between the early modern court beguinage and questions that remain relevant today. They could show the court beguinage not just as a site of devotion, but as a structured female community where patronage, memory, and visual culture expressed identity, female agency, and belonging. By focusing on these dynamics, we intentionally move beyond piety and place autonomy, solidarity, and representation at the heart of the story. At the same time, the volume of research material is simply overwhelming. How can we give voice to literally tens of thousands of women from diverse social and cultural backgrounds across more than 8 centuries of Beguine history? Every archival fragment, artwork, and every archaeological find opens new perspectives, but also reminds us that our sources are partial and mediated. Rather than aiming for completeness, the exhibition embraced this richness and fragmentation as part of the story itself. To conclude, the search for collective structures focused on care, safety, and protection remains deeply relevant. Historically, the court beguinage often acted as a sovkade, a space where women could live with relative freedom and autonomy, outside the usual frameworks of marriage or convent life. By presenting this history as both specific and resonant, the exhibition creates a space for dialogue. At a time when freedom, safety, and self-determination are once again under pressure, the story of the Beguines invites us to reflect on how communities are formed, sustained, and defended in the past, but especially in the present. Thank you.